The Muggle Death Eater and His Daughter by Great 78. Chapter 28. Quills and Questions. Early August, 1996. The warmth of midsummer gave way quickly to the wisps of early autumn. Before long it was time to return to Diagon Alley for school supplies. Hermione and Richard went alone, as Linda had to attend to a dental emergency. Hermione met Harry and Ron along with the rest of the Weasleys there. Ever perceptive, she noticed how both Weasley parents greeted her father by name, and he did the same. As they parted from the group and turned to walk to Dervis and Bangs, she looked appraisingly at her father. "Dad, how did you know the Weasleys' names?" "What do you mean, Crabcake?" "I mean, you're the worst with names. We've lived next door to the McAllisters for 9 years, and you still call them the McElroys. How did you remember Molly and Arthur's names?" "Ah, geez. Well, I would make a joke about my old folks' dementia, but I forgot how it goes." "Dad!" she laughed. A moment later, the sight of 2 blonde wizards in striking dark robes clouded her thoughts, and she forgot entirely about the Weasleys. "Lord Granger, a pleasure, as always," Lucius began, giving a small bow to the 2 of them. "Lucius, good to see you. How goes it?" But it was Draco who scowled. "Everything all right?" Hermione whispered as the 2 of them moved away from their fathers. "No, not really. You know who showed up 2 nights ago. He said his ancestral home has been tainted. Not sure what exactly that means. I gathered from the bit I overheard that he doesn't have a house elf to keep it straightened, and that bloke Peter is pretty shite at cleaning spells." Hermione looked at him in horror. "You mean he stayed there overnight? At your house?" "Yes," Draco whispered, closing his eyes and pinching the bridge of his nose. "Father wanted to give him a house elf, but Mother refused. She worries about their safety." "Well, I'm glad someone does. Imagine the audacity! Offering to give away a living creature like a slave." Hermione looked incensed. Draco started to refute her, but then the image of his elf, Pym, being forced to work for Lord Voldemort came into his mind. It made his insides twist. For all of Pym's faults and quirks, Draco had grown up with the elf, and would hate the idea of him being in danger. As it was, the Malfoys had an unspoken agreement that one of them would remain in the home at all times, hence the reason his mother had not come to Diagon Alley today. So long as a master or mistress of the manor was present in the home, no one else was able to order the elves to do anything that the Malfoys wouldn't allow. "I know, Hermione. I understand. Let's get our supplies, shall we?" They turned to a display of new quills, and Hermione remarked over some of the more interesting ones. "Oh, look at this Oozlum quill," she breathed, picking up a delicate purplish magenta feathered quill, and turning over the price tag. "Oh, 58 galleons. Well, I guess I don't need that." She giggled, and carefully placed the quill back in the black velvet display case. "Why not? Afraid you might eat it?" he teased. "What are you faffing on about now?" she laughed, as she moved down to the more sensibly priced turkey and magpie quills. "You know, half the time in class, you aren't even using your quill because you've already taken all your notes. You're just over there eating a raspberry sugar quill." She huffed. "Shows what you know." She rounded on him and put her arms around his waist. "They're cherry." Draco bit his lip and met her eye. "Well, whatever they are, they drive me mad." They gazed at each other for a long moment, both leaning in closer and closer, until their lips nearly met. A throat cleared from nearby. His father was staring at them, one eyebrow raised imperiously. "Draco, we must go." Lucius swept from the shop, robes billowing behind him. Well, apparently we must go, Draco said, in a sarcastically dramatic imitation of his father. He gave her a quick kiss on the side of her mouth, and hurried after the older wizard. She looked after them for a long moment as they moved up the street. If Voldemort had moved in with the Malfoys, Draco would not be having a good year, even without the impossible task they had been set. Lucius leaned close to whisper to Richard so that no one else in the shop could overhear them. "I'm glad we had a chance to talk. What do you make of his latest endeavours?" There was no need for Lucius to specify who he was. The only problem was Richard had no idea about these endeavours. He sighed. The charade of being in the know was a long-standing one of his, and he knew his affable nature gave him plenty of leeway in that regard, but as always he had to be careful round Lucius. "I'm afraid you'll have to be more specific. Which endeavour do you mean?" "The one with the giants." This last word was whispered through clenched teeth. Giants? Richard thought bemusedly. Geez, couldn't they give it a rest? Now apparently they were bringing in giants? Were those even real? "Well, one thing's for sure. It's going to be a huge undertaking," Richard said, smiling in spite of the clear gravity of the situation. "Quite," agreed Lucius. "The real question is, how can we expect to control them? There are 5 in the forest behind the manor, and they've uprooted at least 20 trees in the last month." He turned in annoyance to Richard. "Do you have any ideas about how to control giants? Get them to listen to us and understand us?" Richard scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Have you considered beans?" "Sorry?" Magic beans. I think those have been used in the past." Lucius frowned in concentration. "Do you think I should use Navy or French?" Richard pretended to consider. "It all depends upon the preparation." "How should I prepare magic beans?" "I'm going to ask at the magical horticulturist shop, Reeds and Weeds. Perhaps they know best." "Good idea," Richard agreed heartily. "Draco, we must go." Without a backwards glance, Lucius hurried from the stationery shop. He shook his head to himself. Magic beans? When would the insanity end? That night, an owl tapped on Hermione's bedroom window. She opened it to find Thorn, Draco's handsome eagle owl. "Hello, lovely," she said, as Houdini came to sniff eagerly at the creature. She laughed a bit at the small ferret's hands petting the regal owl's head. She dropped a few owl treats for the bird, who accepted them gratefully. She detached the small box from his leg, opening the slender package to find 3 gorgeous ouzlum quills nestled in the soft black velvet boxes of Dervish and Bangs. The note read, "H. I know you said you didn't need these, but I can think of no one who deserves them more. I'm looking forward to another year spent with you, no matter what happens. It helps knowing that we're in this together. X. DLM. P.S. Don't eat these." She laughed and flopped back onto the bed, sighing. It would be a long year, she was certain. She could only hope that they could find a solution to the task they had been given. September 1996. Draco had frankly never been happier to board the Hogwarts Express back to school on September 1st. The manor had become unbearable. The disgust of breakfasting with the lewd Peter Pettigrew was only outpaced by the absolute gonad-seizing fear of walking into the library and nearly tripping on a 12-foot-long snake. At every turn, one found oneself hemmed in by Death-Eaters or a deranged-looking Bellatrix, who stormed around in an angry huff everywhere she went, muttering about spawn. Voldemort was a quiet but sinister house-guest, lurking quietly in the shadows of rooms, occasionally clutching the straw in his hands. The meetings between him and his Death Eaters were sporadic. Once he caught sight of Mr. Granger leaving the room they'd been holed up in, but more often he met with only one or two of them at a time, presumably giving them personal missions. To make things worse, more than once he had heard a tree falling in the distant forest, immediately followed by his father's cursing about beans or some other such nonsense. He only felt bad that he was leaving his mother and their elves behind to maintain their sanity amidst all the turmoil. "Fun summer?" Theo asked, as he slid open the door to Draco's compartment. He didn't wait for an answer before continuing. "Mine was. I saw my father for roughly 6 minutes the whole season. It was glorious." Tiberius Knott was not just a hands-off father. Theo once told Draco a story about when he was 4. The man tried to pick him up. Theo had screamed for help from his house elf Franklin so vigorously he developed laryngitis. Now Theo pretended to hate the man so it wouldn't seem so awful when Tiberius didn't have the time of day for him. "Yes, I have a feeling I saw your father more than you did this summer," Draco drawled as he leaned his head back on the seat and closed his eyes. "Salazar's sack. It feels good to relax for once. I've been on edge for weeks." "I'll bet Granger has a solution for that." Theo smiled wickedly. "Shut up, Torser." Draco opened his eyes to slits and gave the other wizard a hard stare. "How's that going, by the way, you and Granger?" "Good. No. Better than good. She's pretty much one of the few people I feel like I can trust right now," Draco said nervously, leaning forward and picking at his cuticles. "Suffice to say, it was not a fun summer at the Malfoy estate this year." "So it's true? He's living there now?" Theo whispered. "He is. Him and his entire creepy entourage," Draco said. "Well, that has to make for fun dinner-time company." Draco closed his eyes again and tried not to picture the lascivious, indecent moans of Peter Pettigrew when they'd had prime rib the night before. "Merlin, you don't want to know." The door opened once more and Blaze walked in. "What's up, wankers? Congrats on the shop, not. I went in when I shopped for my things for school. The place was packed." "Don't remind me," moaned Theo. "Trouble in Investor Paradise?" asked Blaze. "You could say that," said Theo. "The twins have only opened Weasley's Wizard Wheezes 2 months ago, and already they've made enough to pay back 1/3 of my investment loan. At this rate, I'll be pushed out by January." It truly was a magnificent shop, Draco had to admit. He and Hermione had enjoyed meeting up there once his father had finished harassing the poor clerk at Reeds and Weeds about legume varieties. They'd each bought a few things, with Draco coming up with a use for nearly everything they encountered. "That's why you always demand a royalty in perpetuity deal," murmured Draco. "Like you know shit about investing," Theo said. Draco laughed. "You're right, but anyone could see they were going to be a success. Do you remember all the crazy shite they got up to last year? The whiz-bangs, the swamps." "That's true," Theo said miserably. "Oh well, it'll be fun as long as it lasts." Draco studied his friend. They'd practically grown up together, with the main difference being that where Draco's parents always took an interest in him, sometimes to the point of suffocation, Theodore's father had kept him decidedly at arm's length. His mother had died of dragonpox when he was 3, and he barely remembered her. His father, who was already gone much of the time with his international shipping business, took that as his cue to be gone more often. Tiberius had never remarried, and Theo had been raised mostly by a series of human governesses and his personal elf, Franklin, who acted as both a kind of father and a brother to the wizard. "So, if you didn't see Tiberius much this summer, what did you do?" "Oh, a little of this, a little of that," Theo mumbled. "Suddenly, Mum, not much." He was saved from further elaboration by Granger opening the door. "There you are! How are you?" "Better, now that you're here," Draco said, rising to hug her. "Get a room," Theo jeered. "Bugger off," Draco tossed over his shoulder. "Want to take a walk?" she asked, eyeing Blaze and Theo uncertainly. No, Granger. Let us get out of your hair. Give us a mo. It's a lot of hair to be fighting through," said Blaze dryly. "Come on, Theo." "But we're going to miss the show, and the trolley witch is coming by with snacks," complained Theo, gesturing to Draco and Hermione. "Stop making this weird, Theo. Tell you what, Draco, we'll even put a do not disturb sign on the door." Blaze smiled warmly at the couple. Draco was barely listening, intent upon inspecting Hermione's fingernails, which were painted a lovely shade of blue. When the two other wizards left them alone and had tacked up a sign on the outside of the compartment, she dove forward and kissed him eagerly. "I've missed you. I've been worried about you," she said between kisses. "Your last owl said he was fully living there now." Draco nodded somberly. "He hasn't mentioned this assignment again, but I've noticed him staring at me. It's unnerving." Hermione shivered, picturing the bright red eyes of Voldemort. "I can imagine." The door clanged open. "Why do you have a sign that reads Shaggin' Wagon on the door?" Ron Weasley was bowling up the sign that he had yanked from the door. Draco closed his eyes and sighed. "Fucking Blaze," he thought. Weasley was followed by Harry Potter and Ginny. "In case we want to shag later. Clearly, Weasley," Draco said sarcastically. Hermione's eyes went wide at him. "Draco!" "Never mind all that," Ron said. "What we really need to know is what's going on. Mom and Dad went to lots of meetings for the Order this summer. Harry spent a couple of weeks with Sirius and saw them a few times. Sounds like he's still pissed about that prophecy business, but he's moved on. What do you two know?" That explained how her father knew the Weasleys so well, Hermione thought. She and Draco looked at each other. By tacit understanding, they had agreed not to share the task they had been assigned with anyone else, but it would be odd if they had nothing to say. "My father has told me not to worry myself over it. He said he got mixed up with the Death Eaters through a misunderstanding with Lucius, but he's agreed to stay on and give the Order information. He says he's working with the Order, and to steer clear of all of it. Keep my head down and don't talk." "Has your father ever even met you?" Harry joked. "You're one of the least keep your head down and don't talk girls I know." Another girl, who seldom sat down and shut up, spoke. "What about you, Malfoy? What have you heard?" asked Ginny. "Surprisingly little, considering the man is living in my house," Draco offered. At their squawks of shock and disbelief, he nodded. "Yes, he and his crew moved in about 3 weeks or so ago. He meets with all manner of shifty people, but always behind closed doors." "He has a crew?" Ron asked. "Yes, Weasley, I believe you're familiar with Wormtail. That's what everyone calls your rat man. And of course his creepy snake, Nagini." Weasley turned an unhappy green at the mention of his former pet. The others glanced uneasily at each other. "So, what is he planning?" Draco's eyes flitted to Hermione's. "I don't know, but I think he's going to be moving out into the open soon. He's gathering followers." The Gryffindors were waiting behind the boisterous Hufflepuffs to exit the Great Hall after the welcoming feast. "Crazy about Snape getting the defense spot, isn't it?" Harry asked Ron and Hermione as they shuffled forward. "He's been wanting the job forever, supposedly," Hermione said worriedly. "I wonder why Dumbledore gave it to him now." The knowledge of what she and Draco had been asked to do weighed heavily on the back of her mind. "I don't know, but if the job's actually cursed, "I guess we won't have to put up with his tactics any more," Harry grumbled. He and Snape had butted heads since Harry's first year, and the man's supposed allegiance to Dumbledore did nothing to soften their relationship. "He'll be out of here by the end of the school year." Privately, Hermione wondered if that would be true. The year was off to an interesting start, and classes hadn't even begun yet. Chapter 29. Clandestine Conversations and Confessions. Early autumn, 1996. Over the next few months, Linda and Narcissa met with Tonks about once or twice a week. Narcissa kept them apprised of the comings and goings of Lord Voldemort and his disciples, whilst Tonks offered them lessons on self-defence, of both the wizarding and Muggle variety. Linda discussed wizarding healing with them. She had taken numerous medical courses before and during dental school. She knew that she wouldn't be much of a fighter, but if ever there was a fight, it might be helpful to have a medical professional around. Tonks's mother Andromeda worked as a healer, so the younger witch knew a good bit about wizarding healing. Linda had the distinct feeling that Narcissa wanted to ask Tonks to bring Andromeda when they met, but was afraid of being rejected. To explain her whereabouts, Linda told Richard that she had joined a bowling league and a crochet club. In actuality, she had taken up neither of these hobbies, finding that after a long day of digging in people's mouths, her wrists could not handle either activity. Instead, she used these nights as her Charlie's Angels nights, as she had come to refer to them in her head. Richard was annoyed to find that Voldemort summoned them at least one night a week to discuss all manner of mundane, sinister, and sometimes ridiculous things. Therefore, he told Linda that his old friend Robert was getting back into tennis, and wanted to practice doubles, sometimes at the drop of a hat. In actuality, Robert had moved to Edinburgh 3 years ago, but he could have taken up tennis again, Richard reasoned. By tacit understanding, Linda decided not to ask Richard how he was playing tennis with those old beat-up rackets from the cellar, and Richard did not ask to see any of her crocheted mittens. She noticed that he brought up Lucius far more often than before, and he knew that her friendship with Narcissa meant that the two of them spent plenty of time together, not all of it shopping at Tesco. Both of them studiously avoided bringing up Lucius and Narcissa very often, afraid of being questioned for the amount of time they themselves spent in the Malfoys' company. On nights that Linda happened to be away, and the Dark Lord had not summoned Richard, Richard sometimes contacted Lucius. More often than not, Lucius was glad to have an excuse to get away from Malfoy Manor. Their house-guest had long overstayed their welcome, and Lucius heartily wished that all of them would pack up and leave. Richard liked to use these nights to talk through the ideas of blood supremacy and dark magic with Lucius. He was surprised, and more than a little pleased, to learn that the man's views had obviously changed from his youth, when he had first signed on with the Death Eaters. He wasn't sure how much of this change was recent, but in light of their children's relationship, it was welcome, nonetheless. It wasn't all they talked about, of course. Muggle sports and Quidditch also came up frequently, as did the difficulties that Lucius encountered with his newfound role in Voldemort's army. In addition to having to take care of the giants that had been ensconced in Malfoy Forest, Lucius now found himself liaising with goblins and tracking down trolls and yetis. He had no idea when he had become Voldemort's creature person, and he detested it. Richard was full of seemingly helpful suggestions. "You know, maybe the giants are just incredibly bored out there. After all, with only trees and dirt and little animals in the forest, they have nothing to keep them occupied." Richard rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "I might have a good solution. Check back in with me next week." The following week, Lucius arrived in the Granger living room to find himself surrounded by an assortment of broken musical instruments. There was a violin with a split back, a guitar with a cracked fretboard, a punctured drum, a rusty saxophone, a harp with broken turning pins, an old trombone with a sticky slide, a pair of bent cymbals, and a warped triangle.
"What is all of this?"
Lucius asked with barely disguised distaste.
"Well, I think it's a solution to your giant problem. I have a patient who runs a music shop. These instruments are not worth his time to repair, so he gave them to me for free. I figured that you could fix them with magic, enlarge them, and give them to your giants,"
Richard finished with an innocent smile. Lucius ignored the use of the possessive words "your giants." Instead, he asked,
"And what would this accomplish, Granger?"
"Well," Richard said, adopting his explaining things to a toddler tone that got under Lucius's skin so well,
"if they have something besides trees and rocks to occupy themselves with, maybe they'll develop a musical interest, maybe learn to work together in harmony. Form a band, perhaps."
Richard congratulated himself for saying all of that with a straight face.
"Well, it can't sound any worse than all of the banging and grunting that comes out of the forest now," Lucius grumbled. "I swear, I have no idea if they're fighting or mating. Maybe it's the same thing in their culture."
He waved his wand and repaired the instruments one by one, then vanished the lot back to Malfoy Manor. When he got home, he enlarged each of them with an engorging charm, and then floated them out to the forest for the giants to find. With any luck, they would be playing Mozart within weeks. Late October 1996. The school year felt surreal to both Draco and Hermione. On the one hand, it had been the most normal start to the year that either of them had experienced. The familiar house rivalries abounded, and each of the Quidditch teams were preparing to do battle. Clubs were meeting without the need for secrecy, now that Umbridge had been ousted. The first Hogsmeade weekend was approaching, and the crisp bite of autumn nipped at everyone's noses. Still, the pall of knowing the task that they had been given hung like a dark cloud over both of them, dampening their enthusiasm for what should have been a fun year as they approached adulthood within the wizarding world. "I still think that we need to take this problem straight to Dumbledore," Hermione said for the upteenth time that year. The two of them were in the library, studying ancient runes together. As the stack for translations and runes were located far in the back of the library, in a remote corner, the two of them were often able to steal away for a Friday night together, doing some semblance of studying between snogging sessions. The first and only time that Theo had invited himself to one of these study sessions, the cool reception he encountered from the two of them was enough to make him pack up and leave early. Now, Hermione sat in Draco's lap, and they were reading from the same book. Well, she was reading. He was kissing her neck. She sighed in mock exasperation and said, "All right, if we're not going to study, we should be discussing what we plan to do about Dumbledore."
"Hermione, if we are going to discuss Albus Dumbledore right now, I'm going to need you to get off my lap. You can't possibly expect to discuss a 200-year-old man with me, whilst we're kissing."
"Well then, Draco, fine," Hermione grumbled, moving to sit in her own chair. "It's just as well. Pince will be by any moment now. Also, I don't think he's 200 years old. Not yet."
"Either way, he's not someone I want on my head when I'm stogging my witch."
She chuckled quietly, then sobered. "So, what should we do? We can't actually carry out the act, of course, but if we don't figure out something, he's coming for us, and our parents." She sighed and looked at him with her lovely copper eyes. "I think we need to tell Dumbledore."
Draco sighed. "You're probably right, but to be honest, I'm afraid. Not just of the idea of having to tell him we've been assigned to kill him, but of the disappointment. I realize I'm Lucius Malfoy's son, and that has its own encumbrances, but to have to basically confirm those biases, for people to think that I am a dark wizard.
Draco!
Hermione interrupted him.
When he would not look up at her, she reached over and put her hands on his neck, forcing his face up to meet her gaze. His silver eyes were crinkled in worry. No one, I repeat, no one will think of you as a dark wizard for having this task assigned to you. Hell, it was assigned to me too, if you haven't remembered. He shook his head, reaching up to take her hands in his own and hold them on his chest. I can't forget that. We dragged you into all this shit. It's my family's fault that you and your father are even part of this. We would have been part of it either way, Hermione reminded him. At his quizzical look, she said, I'm a Muggle-born. If Voldemort were to continue his rise unchecked, my family and I would be targets, whether we were involved in this fight or not. She paused, then continued, Have you ever wondered why I was sorted into Gryffindor and not Ravenclaw?
Draco smiled. Well, with how well you've handled all this crazy shite we've gone through, I haven't wondered it lately, but yes, I remember thinking when we were 11 that you were one of the smartest people I knew. I remember thinking when the hat touched your head, you would for sure be a Ravenclaw.
I know everyone else couldn't hear what the hat said to me, but it did consider Ravenclaw. However, I think it knew that what I really needed to challenge myself was to strengthen my courage. I can read books and understand them. I can recite runes and prime numbers and the properties of 100 different potion ingredients. But to really succeed, I needed to build my resolve, to become more brave. Draco looked at her as though realizing many new ideas at once. I never thought of the hat as trying to figure out what we needed. Always thought it was just reading what was inside of us. I assumed it was all my family's history within me, and that's why I chose Slytherin. Yes, Slytherins are cunning and strive for greatness, you're right. Hermione smirked knowingly at him. But they also value resourcefulness, and you've had to become quite resourceful these last few years. Staying one step ahead of your father, winning me over. It was Draco's turn to laugh quietly.
Admit it, witch. You're only after me for my looks and my books.
Hermione raised an eyebrow. Well, neither of them hurt your case. He pulled up one hand of hers and kissed her wrist.
You might be right. Let's wait until after this upcoming Hogsmeade weekend. That way, if he decides to expel me, we'll at least have one nice weekend together.
She shook her head, but smiled. All right. We'll go see him next week. Early November, 1996.
The Dark Lord has asked me to track down Yetis, and yet I have no idea where to find them, nor how to trap them once I do.
Lucius was sitting with his feet propped up on an ottoman, enjoying a Newcastle, this one not laced with veritaserum. Between the two men sat a bowl of crisps and a sleeve of biscuits. Richard was amused to find out that Lucius had never tried Oreos, and it turned out they were his new favourite, so Richard always had them around. They put the wizard in a better mood.
"Well, where have you looked?"
asked Richard conversationally. Lucius looked at Richard incredulously.
"All of the usual places," he said snobbishly.
"Well, forgive me. In Muggle parlance, a Yeti is a fictional creature. Where do magical Yetis live?"
Lucius hesitated. I suppose the same place that Muggle Yetis live. Where, exactly, do they reside?"
Richard could tell that Lucius was trying his best to keep his tone light whilst fishing for ideas and answers.
"Well, I know they're rumoured to be in the Himalayas." The Himalayas. What are those? Ah, geez, I'm always bad at geography. I think it's a mountain range in part of Asia. Tell you what, I can find out for you. Give me a mo.
Richard motioned for Lucius to follow him to an adjoining room, and pressed a button on an odd beige box which began emitting a series of beeps and whirs. Lucius eyed it distrustfully.
"All right, let's see,"
Richard said, sitting down at the desk and tapping on something. On the uppermost box a series of cryptic shapes appeared that Lucius soon realized were words.
"What are you doing?"
Lucius asked.
Just connecting to Netscape. Only needs a sec."
"What exactly is the Netscape?"
"Well, it's sort of like a source of information about all kinds of things. It's like having 24 books, but only about whatever it is you're looking for."
The uppermost glass-fronted rectangle now changed from black with white letters to a small depiction of an hourglass, followed by a picture of a sunlit meadow.
"Is that the Netscape?"
Lucius asked in breathless wonder, reaching out one hesitant finger, intending to push into the meadow and touch the grass, but only finding a smooth glass surface.
"Not quite," Richard said. "Okay, now let me see. Here it is. Just takes a minute to connect. I've got to disconnect the house phone and plug this in. Hold on."
He fiddled with long cords sticking out from the wall. There was another long series of beeps, scratching noises, an ear-piercing whistling coo that sounded like the mating call of the niffler, and then Richard pronounced it ready. He tapped again on the collection of buttons on the tabletop. After a moment, the rectangle at the top of the beige box began to change. Words slowly formed on it, starting at the top and then filling in line by line.
"Wow!"
Lucius exclaimed, unable to help himself.
"I know! It's incredibly fast, isn't it?"
Richard asked excitedly. They read about Yetis for several minutes. It turned out that early adopters of the internet had many theories about how to find and trap a Yeti. Lots of them involved using fresh meat and a variety of nets. One person had even helpfully uploaded a photograph of a Yeti, which Lucius studied intently. To Richard, it looked more like a drunk university student with his mum's fur coat and a Polaroid camera, but he was enjoying Lucius's fascination with the topic nonetheless.
"Ready?"
Hermione asked, putting her hand in Draco's as they stood outside the gargoyle leading to the headmaster's office. Early in the day, Hermione had spoken with Professor McGonagall, and she had in turn relayed the message to Professor Dumbledore that they wished to speak with him. A note had been sent to Hermione requesting that they stop in his office at 8 o'clock that night.
"No," Draco said, "but I doubt I will ever be ready. Let's go."
Somehow, the gargoyle must have alerted Dumbledore to their presence, because it swung aside, revealing a revolving spiral staircase. With one last glance at each other for reassurance, both of them stepped onto the bottom step. "So, that's what he's asked us to do," Hermione finished, after nearly 10 minutes of speaking. Draco had barely anything to add, as Hermione's recollection of the event was so clear. Professor Dumbledore sat at his desk, fingers steepled thoughtfully as he leaned back in his chair. It was hard not to notice the headmaster's blackened hand, though he appeared unperturbed by it.
"Draco, you've been uncommonly quiet during all of this. What are your thoughts?"
Draco jumped at being addressed.
My thoughts are, I don't want to do this. I don't want our parents killed. I don't want me and Hermione to be killed, but I have no idea what to do. He seems to think it's simple enough for a 16-year-old to walk into a room and murder someone.
Yes, he would think that. He would easily think that, in fact. Dumbledore nodded thoughtfully, looking over their heads as though recalling something very specific. The two of them waited for him to speak again, and after a long moment, he did.
I think the three of us alone cannot do this correctly. We shall need others," Dumbledore finally said, leaning forward and placing his hands flat upon the desk.
"Who are you thinking of?" Hermione asked breathlessly. Draco took a deep breath to steady himself. The idea of bringing in others on this secret frightened him. It was bad enough that they had to reveal it to Dumbledore. Who else would have to know? Who else would have the idea planted in their minds that Draco might be a dark wizard?
"Let me think on it. I will send a note to each of you, and we can meet again next week."
Hermione nodded and rose from her seat, with Draco following suit. "Thank you, Professor Dumbledore," she said warmly, reaching out her right hand instinctively to shake his. Then she seemed to remember his blackened hand and pulled back reflexively, offering her left hand awkwardly after a moment. "Sir, can we ask you—"
"No, Miss Granger," said the kindly older wizard. "It is a riveting tale that must wait for another day, I'm afraid."
Chapter 30. Toes and Fingers. November 1996. In the middle of November, Richard missed several calls from Lucius on his burner mobile. He had lost the phone for a few days, as it had slipped between the seats in the station wagon. It wasn't until Richard was chasing a dropped lemon sherbet that he found it again. He was shocked to see that he had missed 48 calls, a few of which had voicemails. Lucius had not known how to leave a message, and had started talking as soon as the messaging system answered, so each recording began mid-diatribe.
"Brought along his book, and it's entirely useless. I'm fairly certain this Lockhart wanker never even met a Yeti. The man is a nincompoop, clearly. He talks about their droppings and their mating habits, the unusual calls they make at night. I've heard nothing of the sort. The only sound out there is just snow falling on snow, and wind howling in the trees. It's eerie, I tell you, Richard."
The next message, dated the following day, was more urgent.
"Really don't think I have enough meat to attract one, and the cave I'm staying in is very dark. My wand just can't generate enough light. I'm fairly certain there are animals watching me at night. I suppose I could try and trap them if they are small, and use them for extra meat, but they sound like they're planning something."
The final recording was even more dire.
"And I can hardly feel my hands, Richard. My warming charms are shit out here. I had to kill a mountain lion, and slit him open and sleep inside of his warm body last night. You cannot imagine the feeling of waking up inside the carcass of a cold, dead lion."
Evidently, it had become clear to Lucius that the voice messages weren't getting through, and somehow he had discovered that the phone also had the ability to send written messages. The first one was cryptic.
7424.
Then
7424. Richard, help!
And finally,
"No Yeti, what do?"
Richard called Lucius immediately.
"Lucius? Sorry, mate, I lost my mobile. Are you all right?"
"No," Lucius said. His voice sounded very tinny and far away, but the desperation came through just fine.
"I can't feel my toes, and I'm pretty sure there are no Yeti here. I'm not sure what to do."
"Well, why don't you just come home?"
Do you think that's a good idea? The Dark Lord will be so angry."
"Lucius, if you can't feel your toes, they'll have to cut your toes off," Richard began.
"Salazar's anus! Just a moment."
And the call disconnected. Richard hung up, unsure of what had happened. He idly wondered what a salad bar anus was. A few minutes later, the mobile rang again.
"Lucius?"
"Yes, I'm home. I've decided that you are right. My toes are worth more
than a yeti." "Geez, I think you're right." Richard suppressed a laugh. "Tell you what, let me see what I can do."
A few days later, when Lucius stopped by, Richard brought in a large shopping bag from the cellar.
"I picked this up. I thought it might work out for you." "What is it?"
Lucius asked warily.
"It's a yeti costume."
"Am I to wear it?" Lucius asked, in mild horror.
"No, but maybe just have one of the other Death Eaters put it on and walk around at the edge of the forest. You can point him out to the Dark Lord through the window, and he'll think you've captured a yeti,"
Richard explained. There was a growing sense of pleased excitement on Lucius's face.
"I think I can do even better. I'm fairly certain I can get a dwarf to do it. I'm sure for a small stipend he will actually live out in the forest as the yeti."
Richard hid his silent but horrified laugh. Some days, he thought, Lucius was far too cunning for his own good. Late November, 1996.
"Fizzing Wisbies,"
Draco said to the gargoyle with only a minimal eye roll. Hermione looked up at him and smiled knowingly. "You like fizzing Wisbies too," she whispered conspiratorially.
"Yes, but you don't see me making a password out of it. I'm surprised he doesn't choose something more distinguished, more befitting the office."
It was Hermione's turn to roll her eyes. "When you are headmaster, you choose something befitting the office, all right?" He narrowed his silver eyes at her, but before he could answer they had arrived. They were startled to walk into the room and find not just Dumbledore and Fawkes, but Richard Granger, Professor Snape, and their old Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, Remus Lupin. Hermione ran swiftly to her father, throwing her arms around him in a fierce hug. "Dad, what are you doing here?" she asked, struggling to keep the tears from her voice.
"In due time, Crabcake," he murmured to her. To both of them he said, "Let us all sit down and listen to what Professor Dumbledore has to say."
The group settled into magically conjured chairs, and Dumbledore began.
"Well, it's actually Mr. Malfoy and Miss Granger who need to explain what is going on. Would the two of you mind letting everyone know what happened this summer?"
Hermione looked down, suddenly afraid to speak. It had been hard enough explaining what was going on to Professor Dumbledore. To tell her father now that she had been tasked with a murder seemed impossible. She cut her eyes right to Draco, who appeared to be focusing on winding his fingers together as tightly as he could, the same paralysis of the tongue affecting him as well.
"Perhaps I can be of some assistance, Professor."
The smooth tones of Severus Snape cut into the silence. All eyes turned swiftly to him in surprise, with the exception of Albus Dumbledore's.
"You see, I am not only a member of the Order of the Phoenix, but I still serve at the side of the Dark Lord."
At this proclamation, Professor Lupin jumped to his feet. "Dumbledore, what is the meaning of—"
"Please, Remus, don't interrupt. This is important," Dumbledore said mildly. "I have known that Severus still meets with Voldemort, still maintains the pretense of serving him. He has been the source of valuable information in the past. Without his help, Hogwarts and its inhabitants would have been in far greater danger several times over these many years."
"But if he's giving information to Voldemort—"
"The information I give the Dark Lord is generally only mildly helpful to him, at best. And all of it is discussed with Dumbledore before I give it. I have worked hard to maintain my facade, and I have no intent for that to change, Lupin. You, of all people, understand the need to maintain a facade."
Snape sneered at him. Draco and Hermione exchanged curious glances. What was all this about? Lupin sat down, tight-lipped, but still clearly angered. Once Snape was assured of everyone's silence and attention, he resumed.
As I was saying, perhaps I can shed some light upon the subject. This summer I was told in confidence by the Dark Lord that he was giving the task of killing Albus Dumbledore to Mr. Malfoy and Miss Granger.
There was a gasp from both Professor Lupin and Hermione's father.
As for the two of you, I can tell you this.
Snape turned to the students.
He does not intend for you to succeed. He knows that it will prove to be nearly impossible. Not just because murder is actually quite difficult to bring oneself to do, but also because he knows Dumbledore to be an extremely powerful wizard. He is certain that Dumbledore will be forced to kill the two of you. Then he will be free to punish your parents as punishment for your failures.
Hermione began breathing very fast, hyperventilating. Draco's own heart was racing double time, but he reached out a hand to hold hers in comfort. Her tearful copper eyes met his silver ones. Reluctantly, she looked at her father. "Why is he out to kill them?" Hermione whispered in disbelief.
It was Snape who answered. I believe the Dark Lord still holds animosity towards Lucius for losing the prophecy.
As for your father... Snape raised an eyebrow as though the answer were obvious. Dumbledore cut in. I believe Voldemort feels that Richard is an interloper and a threat to his organization.
Yes, Snape drawled. He certainly feels threatened by your father.
He added something under his breath that sounded vaguely like we all do. Dad, say something, Hermione pleaded. Richard seemed to struggle to find his voice. Finally he said, Not to worry, Crabcake. We're going to figure this out. And so, the six of them began going over ideas, discussing possibilities, and reviewing what they knew. Hermione occasionally had to pinch herself when she realized what seemed to be happening. Her father, an easy-going dentist by trade, was discussing tactics as though he was conversing about the weather. It seemed surreal to hear him talk about safe houses and counter-curses. Dumbledore cleared his throat. It is getting late. Curfew starts soon. Perhaps Miss Granger and Mr. Malfoy can leave us and go back to their common rooms. Let us plan to meet again next week. Say Wednesday night at 8. Everyone nodded, and the two students rose to leave. Dumbledore spoke up again. I wish to thank both of you for trusting me with this information, and not feeling as though you needed to keep it all to yourselves. It takes a great deal of courage to ask for help. But rest assured, as I've told my students before, help will always be given at Hogwarts to those who ask for it. Draco and Hermione nodded and turned to go. Richard rose to say goodbye to his daughter with a strong hug and a quick handshake for Draco. They climbed the stairs for Gryffindor Tower, their fingers interlaced. When they reached the little space that Hermione thought of as their alcove, she stopped and turned to him. Thank you for coming with me tonight. I know it was hard to have all of that said aloud.
I only hope your father doesn't think less of me,
he murmured into her hair. Draco, she drawled. What is it? He asked, tilting his head to look at her quizzically. She looked at him with a fiery gaze. I don't want to talk about my father right now. She cocked one eyebrow at him. A flush rose up his neck, then his cheeks. Oh, he said. After all, They still had about 20 minutes until curfew. When they parted ways several minutes later, they shared one last kiss goodnight and hurried for their respective common rooms. For the first time, sixth year felt like it should have for both of them this whole time, full of possibility, with a silver lining of hope bursting from behind a cloud of despair. The four men waited until the door with the griffin knocker snickered closed behind Hermione and Draco. Then they turned to look at each other in uncertain silence.
"What do you make of this? Why would he ask the two of them together?"
Richard asked the group at large.
"It is a test, certainly," said Dumbledore. "Perhaps it is a test of yours and Lucius's loyalty to him. Or perhaps it is simply a way of getting Hermione out of the picture. Does he have any idea that Lucius believes Hermione is his?" "I don't believe so, and it isn't my intention to let him know that. I've never asked Lucius not to discuss it with him, but I have a feeling that if he did, Voldemort would come out of the conversation more confused than he went in. Lucius has a tendency to muddy the waters." "Yes, I remember his Transfigurations assignments over the years," Dumbledore chuckled. "So, what are we going to do, really?" Richard asked. "I realize you didn't want to get into details with the children here, but I know you don't honestly expect one of them to kill you."
Dumbledore sighed, shaking free his robe from his right hand, which until now he had covered discreetly.
"No, I do not wish that. It would be too much of a burden for either of them to bear. However, it is certain that my days are numbered anyway."
Remus and Richard recoiled in horror at the sight of the blackened hand. "Dumbledore, what happened?" Remus asked.
"An unfortunate encounter with a cursed object. Very foolish, quite stupid of me. Severus here managed to contain the dark magic to one hand. However, with time, even that will not suffice. Eventually, the dark magic will spread and overtake me. I have less than a year, we think."
The tense set of Snape's jaw gave away nothing but displeasure. Remus eyed him carefully. "You did all you could."
"You care to try for yourself?"
Snape challenged.
"Yes, I did all I could, considering that Dumbledore waited several minutes before calling me. You should know that many students have commented that I am the best defense against the dark arts teacher they've had yet."
"Let me guess," sneered Remus. "All of those students wear green." Snape sneered back. He opened his mouth to reply, but both of the men were immediately silenced as Dumbledore raised his blackened hand.
"Gentlemen, I welcome both your help in this regard. However, I must accept that my days are few. I do not wish for our time spent together to be marred by bickering."
The two men nodded curtly at each other, an unspoken understanding to maintain peace.
"Now then—"
But Dumbledore was interrupted yet again, this time by Richard Granger.
"Professor, I hope you don't mind me asking something."
"Not at all, sir, and please call me Albus."
"All right, Albus. I was just wondering, have you ever considered debridement?"
Richard asked. All three of the men looked at each other and at him in confusion.
"I have never married,"
Dumbledore explained kindly.
No, sorry," Richard chuckled. "It's a surgical procedure. A doctor removes the dead, diseased tissue, leaving the healthy tissue to thrive. We have to do it occasionally in my dental practice."
"I'm afraid that any kind of injury caused by dark magic cannot be fully removed," Dumbledore said, though he sounded more uncertain now.
I realize you can't remove it magically, but perhaps there is a Muggle method. Would you be willing to try it?" "That depends," said Dumbledore, with uncertainty. "Would you be willing to perform the procedure?"
"Ah, geez," Richard said.
"I'm certain there are far more qualified surgeons than me that you would rather have."
"Ah, but you see, I trust you to do it." Richard was silent for a moment, then cleared his throat.
"Well, okay then. I would be honored."
He swallowed a bit nervously.
"I'm going to need some help, though."
Remus spoke up. "I'm sure that Severus and I will make capable assistance," he said, looking across the table at Snape, who nodded in agreement.
"When can we do this? It should be as soon as possible," Snape said. "The dark magic creeps out little by little every day. In another month it will move past his wrist."
"What sort of charms did you use to contain it?" Remus asked Snape, studying Dumbledore's hand interestedly. It was a question born of curiosity, not of challenge. That much was clear from Remus's tone.
"I did a localized stasis charm, followed by continuous healing chants and repelling charms, in order to push the magic into his extremity,"
Snape said, pointing at the dark hand. "And the furthest it would go was his hand?" Remus said, brow furrowing in concentration.
"Yes and no," Snape said. "I could make it shrink down to only the index finger, as that was the finger with which he touched the object, but I could not get it to stay in only that finger. As soon as the stasis charm faded, it moved back into the rest of his hand, and each time it moved further and further out from the initial injury. I finally realized that the dark magic was fighting back, making it progress faster, so I stopped trying to reduce it and focused on containment instead."
Remus said, lost in thought. "What if—" But he broke off, still considering. He tilted his head from side to side, as though trying to look for different angles on the problem.
"What are you thinking, Lobo?"
Richard asked. "I'm only wondering, if Severus were to push the dark magic temporarily into only that finger, and simultaneously I were to do a stasis charm, and someone else a severing charm, and then you did the divinement—"
"Debridement,"
Richard said, nodding along with his words. "Yes, that. Well, do you think that perhaps Dumbledore might only need to lose that finger?" Richard asked the others excitedly. For once, Snape's expression was not hardened into a mask of indifference. He seemed genuinely interested in what Remus had to say.
"Perhaps it could work."
"And, at worst, what would happen? Dumbledore loses a bit more wrist if the magic fights back, and we try the same procedure from that point. In the end, perhaps it is worth trying." Remus was excited now.
Snape nodded vigorously. "I say we try this, as soon as possible." He turned to Richard. "Today is Wednesday. When can you come back? I'd like to have a day or so to brew a few intensive pain relief potions, but I can be ready as early as Friday evening."
Richard looked at them regretfully.
"Unfortunately, we're going to my in-laws for the weekend. Believe me, I would rather be here cutting off your hand, Albus."
Professor Dumbledore snorted behind his blackened hand.
"Monday night, then?" asked Snape.
I'm afraid Monday won't be the best for me. I will be, indisposed that evening."
"Ah, yes," Snape said snidely. we would all rather you stay in your home that day as well. You must maintain your facade, we know."
Richard cut in.
"Sorry if this seems rude to ask, Professor Snape, but what problem do you have with my friend Remus here? I've known this man for almost 9 years, and he's been nothing but unfailingly polite and professional in that time. What gives?"
Richard's generally affable demeanour had a slightly hardened edge. "Mouse, please, it's all right. Professor Snape and I were in school together, and some old hurts run deep."
"But what's this guff about maintaining a facade? I realize I didn't know you were a wizard all those years, but surely he knew."
"There's more to it than that," Remus interjected in a ragged voice. There's something else I've never told you about myself, something I usually try to keep under wraps. However, seeing as Professor Snape has been kind enough these last 3 years to brew a particular potion for me, he's known my secret for quite some time."
"Lobo, you don't have to reveal anything,"
Richard cut in, but Remus stopped him. "I know I don't. But as a trusted colleague and a friend, you deserve to know in case anything were to happen in the future. When I was a young boy, I was bitten by a werewolf at the full moon. Since that awful day, every month at the full moon, I transform into a werewolf."
"Ah, jeez,"
Richard whispered to himself. "Indeed," agreed Remus. "For the past couple of years, Severus has been kind enough to brew the potion that allows me to transform into a regular wolf instead of a werewolf every month. However, I am still unable to speak or to perform magic during the time of the full moon." Richard nodded. "Can we do this Tuesday night?" Remus asked the others.
Everyone nodded. 8 o'clock again, then," Dumbledore said.
Richard shook hands with each of the men. Then he turned back to Remus.
"You know, Lobo, this explains a lot. Like how you always know how to get where we're going, but you're seldom on time."
Remus smiled, knowing there was a joke coming, but not knowing what the punchline was. "How so?"
"Well, because you're a werewolf, not a win-wolf."
From behind the two of them came an exaggerated, long-suffering sigh.
"As we have reached the witticism portion of the evening, that is my cue to leave. I have essays to grade."
Snape moved swiftly to the door.
Richard called after him, "Sounds charming. Watch out for spelling errors."
Snape stopped, but did not turn, his hand on the doorknob, white-knuckled, gripping it tightly. Richard could not leave well enough alone.
"You know, spelling errors."
Snape threw open the door, causing it to bang into the wall, as he hurried swiftly out.
"Ah, jeez. That bloke could use an anger management course,"
Richard said, turning back to Lupin and Dumbledore.
"He already knows how to anger the management,"
Dumbledore said with a kindly smile.
Thank you for listening to The Muggle Death Eater and His Daughter by Great 78. If you enjoyed this and would like to listen to more, please subscribe to me on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts at Silver and Copper, or search Great 78 on Archive of Our Own.